Hello, folks, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is Tony Byrne from Real Story Group. Good to see you all today. Dealing with a topic that's kind of near and dear to our hearts, not just CDPs, but composable CDPs. Composability is a really interesting concept. It's something we have been working on and playing with and working around really for the 2 decades that Real Story Group has been around. And so it's interesting in the context of CDPs, definitely a lot of myths and a lot of realities. And so I'm excited to be here with my colleague, Apoorv Durga, and we're going to be walking you through our latest thinking on this. So a little bit of background here first. Wanted to just let you know that all of you will get a copy of this deck afterwards, so you can expect that in the next 48 hours or so. Those of you who are Real Story Group subscribers, you will get a copy of the actual recording as well in your library when you log in. So just wanted to let you know that you can ask questions at any time in the GoToWebinar control panel. And so that should be on the right hand of your screen. Just go to the questions. You can ask any question, any comment, anything at all, and we'll have time at the end to answer that. So we know that a lot of you are new to Real Story Group. A little bit of background about the firm. I actually started the firm in 2001, and it was really in part because of this quadrant you see on the left, is that we found that the analysis and advice from traditional analyst firms was really lacking. We in depth and in technical quality, but also we felt like they weren't really telling a real story about how the vendors worked. Then we found out that many of these analyst firms are also working for the vendors that they're supposed to evaluate, and so we thought that was a conflict of interest. So we set up our own independent policy where we were never going to consult with vendors, never speak at their events, never write white papers, and only tell you the real story about how these tools actually work. So over time, we evaluated vendors across a variety of different marketplaces. Now we cover 10 different marketplaces, including customer data platforms, which you can see is the orange line on our subway map. So this is a subway map or tube map. It shows all of the different vendors that we evaluate and, of course, how they intersect. You can see kind of a city center here with some major players, and then where a lot of the innovation and interesting things are happening is out in the periphery, as you might expect. So today we're going to be talking about customer data platforms, but also to some extent talking about the broader stack as well. This is not really a stack diagram. I'm going to show you that one in a bit. This is more of a flat diagram of the different marketplaces and how they intersect. The stack is, of course, what you do and what you build. And so when we're talking about CDPs, we're talking about composability within CDPs, the first thing that you want to do is, of course, approach it from kind of a stack context. So this is our reference model. This is the B2C reference model. You could also apply this in a kind of with slight changes to a B2B context. But this is a traditional kind of enterprise architecture view of services rather than platforms. So these are key capabilities, and of course, you start at the top where the customers are with engagement channels, a variety of interaction delivery environments, and then where many of us have been focused, at least in the 2010s and early 2020s, around engagement services. So that's that first kind of colored row in the middle here. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of customer data kind of got stuck and siloed. That's also where a lot of content got stuck and siloed and a lot of decision logic as well. So we think that the future in the 2020s is really around the development of enterprise foundation services that are decoupled from your engagement environment. And so it'll fall into 3 different columns here. You can see content and information on the left, decisioning on the far right, and then the middle, what we're most interested in here is customer data, which falls into customer data activation, customer data operations, enterprise data intelligence. And again, these are services, right? So you may have multiple logos in each one of these boxes, and in fact, you may have a single logo straddling multiple boxes. This isn't necessarily about platforms. So in fact, what we have argued really for the last 15 years or so as we've been advising on MarTech stacks is that composability is a good thing. You don't necessarily want the same platform for your WCM that also does your outbound marketing. You don't necessarily want your e-commerce platform to be bound to your personalization platform. That composing these different solutions, and in fact, finding the most success by composing these different solutions from different vendors turns out to be the winning story. And when we look across our own subscriber base of large enterprises, the most successful ones typically have different logos across these different boxes. And so composability has always been a key dimension in building any kind of an effective MarTech stack. The question then becomes like, well, how fine-grained do you get here, right? And so that's what we're going to be getting into today. How do we decompose into what small of a dimension of pieces before at some point you become so decomposed that it becomes difficult for your business and marketing people to get value from the platform. So there's a balance to be played there. On the one hand, you want your stack to be composed, to be composable. On the other hand, there's certain services that you don't necessarily always want to decompose. So the question really is, to what extent, right? And so we can talk, for example, in the CDP context, I think we can all agree that customer data activation, that's a CDP core service. But when you talk to CDP vendors and you look at what they do, they can also do a number of other things, right? Like customer data operations, which would be customer data management, heavy duty identity resolution, that sort of thing. Some will do enterprise data intelligence. I would argue you probably don't want that from your CDP, but many of them offer it. Many CDPs offer a whole panoply of decisioning services on the right, and some CDPs will even do outbound marketing. So right away, this whole issue of composability smacks you in the face, and has always smacked you in the face with respect to your CDP choices, which is really around how broad of a scope do you want to have encompassed within a single platform. But then, you know, within your customer data ecosystem, it becomes an issue as well. And before I turn this over to my colleague, we're going to just say, look, we're very much in favor of enterprise data warehouses. They're very important of enterprise stacks. And that when we look at our own customer base of large enterprises, really 100% of you have one. I think the question of composability is what's the role of the data warehouse in your customer data management ecosystem? When people talk about CDP composability, that's usually the question that they're asking, is what is the role of your enterprise data warehouse? And it turns out that there's a lot of different roles that can play. So before we get to the end, I'm going to preview this a little bit, which is, you know, when vendors talk about composability and they have different stories around it, it's marketed as something, you know, revolutionary with more agility and innovation. That's not necessarily true, but you really have to drill down into what do they mean when they say composable. It could mean that their platform can be broken up into different modules, or it could mean that they're really just a reverse ETL vendor who's trying to tell you not to buy a CDP. Those are two very different stories, right? So the question then becomes, is this actually something novel at all, or even, dare I say, revolutionary? You have to really dig into what does it mean to be composable, and what's your orientation towards your data warehouse, which may be the source of truth for much of your enterprise customer data. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Apoorv, who's going to talk about composability in context. Apoorv.
Thank you, Tony, and hello, everyone. So let's set some context around composability. It's not really a trend that just popped up alongside the CDP discussions, right? In fact, it's been a part of the very fabric of system design and software engineering for a really long time. So composability is like building blocks, where each block is designed to work with other blocks in harmony. So these blocks or components are modular, interoperable, and scalable, which means they can grow and adapt without disrupting the whole system. Over time, we have seen these principles making a significant impact on several other marketplaces, most notably content management systems and e-commerce platforms. However, it is important to note that some vendors might lead you to believe that composability is all about using data warehouse as a backend for storage. That's a rather limited view in our opinion, and we'll have more to say about it. True composability goes beyond just storage solutions, so let's keep that broader perspective in mind as we move forward. So composability is not a feature but a spectrum. So just to build upon what I was saying and what Tony also covered, composability extends well beyond data storage or well beyond data warehousing. It's about being able to choose the right tools for the right choice and ensuring that these tools work with each other for your goals and objectives. Right. So in that sense, composability isn't really an on-off switch, right? You just can't switch it on or switch it off. It's not something that you simply have or you don't have, right? Instead, it's a spectrum. It's a continuum that evolves. Or in other words, like we covered earlier, MarTech stacks are by default composable. The degree of composability varies. Right? Therefore, composability must be thought of in the context of your larger business strategy and how your technology stack will evolve and all of that. Essentially, each piece of tech that you add to your stack should align with your business goals. So as we move to the next slide, Tony. Yeah, it's appearing a bit slowly. Sorry about that. Right. So many vendors who've been championing the term composable CDPs began primarily with rather limited set of reverse ETL services. Now this term, over time, this term now acts as a strategic facade used to gloss over the limitations of their offerings. I've said this before, that reverse ETL isn't a platform, but a feature. And that's been proven right with several activation platforms now embedding reverse ETL capabilities. And that has reduced the viability of standalone reverse ETL products. Of course, to counter that, reverse ETL vendors started building adjacent capabilities such as segmentations or audience building and so on. And then composable CDP became a convenient umbrella for all of those adjacent offerings. So as you evaluate these solutions, it is important that you dive deeper beyond the labels and ensure that what is promised actually aligns with what will be delivered. Okay, so let's now talk a bit about the issue of marketing messaging. Right. So many a times when these composable CDP vendors talk about their composable capabilities in their blog posts or in their other marketing messages, are they actually talking about their own product, or are they leaning on the strengths of an associated data warehouse? There is often a lot of confusion about that, and this confusion really does not serve the customer well. This overlap can often blur the lines, making it difficult to discern the distinctive distinctions between the data warehouse and the composable CDP. And a rather unintended consequence of this is the fact that you end up lumping together highly featured robust CDPs along with more narrowly focused tools like reverse ETL solutions. Right. So this is like sort of comparing apples and oranges, right? They are not really comparable. And if two of them are in the same shortlist, probably one of them is in the wrong place, right? And finally, there is also this speculation about DWH vendors moving into or acquiring CDP vendors or CDP capabilities. We have seen a lot of DWH vendors acquiring adjacent capabilities like data clean rooms, for example. So it's only a matter of time before they get into the CDP space. And what will that mean for those vendors who are dependent on DWH vendors? So that's an important factor to consider. Therefore, it is important to really differentiate between what the CDP provides and what the data warehouse provides for your own real life use cases. Targeting the wrong opponent. So another thing that we notice is very frequently that these reverse ETL vendors targeting the traditional CDPs as their competitors, often in their messaging. So they often talk about why a traditional CDP is bad at this or why they are not doing something, etc. I think that's a bit misguided. Instead of considering traditional CDPs as their competition or a challenge, I think the real challenge for end users in the industry is not whether to use a composable CDP versus a traditional CDP, but how do you use these capabilities using good architectural practices and use them in a manner that all the components talk to each other, like we talked about in the initial slides for the MarTech stack. So essentially, instead of getting caught up in the composable versus traditional debate, I think it's important to focus efforts on addressing these underlying architectural inefficiencies. So let's talk about another thing that comes up very often, and that's the perception that composable CDPs are less expensive. But is that really so? So there are essentially two aspects here. First argument is that since you are not replicating data, there is a huge cost saving. Now storage is cheap and the costs keep going down, but sure, there is some cost saving there because you have less copies of data. Then the second argument is that since data warehouse is doing the heavy lifting, you also save on the compute costs, CDP compute costs. Now, remember that these costs don't just disappear. Essentially, what you are doing is that you are shifting those costs to the data warehouse upstream, right? So that shift can actually lead to increase overall compute demand on your DWH, because of course now your DWH takes more of the workload, which in turn results in higher operational costs, obviously. Also, remember that especially for real-time use cases, you will need to keep your DWH cluster always active or always on, and that adds a lot to your additional costs. So it's important to not just take these claims at face value, but instead do a more thorough cost-benefit analysis that accounts for all your potential costs, including storage and compute and all of the other ones. Another popular topic in the data management world is this idea of achieving a single source of truth. Because you are using a data warehouse and you can use the data from there, there is no need to copy that data elsewhere, right? So you have a single source of truth. I think we have seen this before, even in the enterprise content management space, where they tried to create a single source of truth for all kinds of data, and we know that it did not work out, obviously, because there are so many different scenarios, and using the same data or same content for different varying scenarios is not trivial. I think same holds true for MarTech stacks as well, for CDPs as well. Also remember that a typical MarTech stack often has 50 to 100 SaaS based applications, and all of them require some subset of your customer data, right? So you might need fewer attributes, but you still copy those attributes anyways to all of those applications, right? So even if you don't copy into a CDP, there are 100 other applications where you copy some subset of this. So you're anyways copying data everywhere, and I would argue that you often end up copying more data into these engagement platforms, since you would need some sort of CDP functionality like segmentation, etc., in each of those platforms, right? So that all is actually complicating your data architecture and introduces several other potential inefficiencies in any way. So single source of truth is good in theory, but in practical real life scenarios, I think it's not something that's really common. Vendor lock-in, right? So I'll quickly speak about it. So another claim that we hear from composable CDP vendors is that traditional CDP vendors lock you in. But in a MarTech stack, like I said, there are 80 other applications, right? So there are several vendor lock-ins anyways there, right? So you have a vendor lock-in with your hosting provider, right? With AWS, with Google, with Azure. You also have vendor lock-in with your engagement platform. And what about the vendor lock-in with the data warehouse vendor itself, right? Your data is logged in to Snowflake or Google BigQuery or whatever, right? So I think vendor lock-in is also another claim that you should actually look at very carefully, evaluate it very critically, and see if it is actually a vendor lock-in or not. Okay, Tony. I think I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, so I think the other thing that we've seen that's been really interesting is that that while everyone might have an enterprise data warehouse, not everyone not every organization wants to use that as their customer data hub. And there's a lot of complicated reasons why that might be. So we have actually seen a subset of the CDP market where the CDP is not a system of reference, but a system of record. We call these more processing or management-oriented CDPs that serve as this more universal hub. It may be fed by a data warehouse, but it's also fed by a number of other sources. And so it becomes, in a sense, the unifier of this customer data rather than the data warehouse. There's a lot of good reasons, particularly in a large enterprise, why you might want to choose that architecture. So someone might say, well, that's not a composable CDP because here you're doing, on one hand, both data operations in terms of managing the data, and then on the other hand, also doing data activation in the same platform. And so, it becomes for sure a more heavier weight solution, but it has been a legitimate choice that many of our larger enterprises have decided to select. It's not for everyone. In fact, it's a minority of the market, but it's a legitimate architectural paradigm. So here again, the question is, what works for one organization might not work for another. You all come at this from a different history, from a different set of capabilities, different set of maturity we often find, particularly around issues of identity resolution and data quality. And so the scope of what you need from a CDP is going to be different. And just to continue this theme, on the left hand, we have the more processing-oriented, heavy-duty CDPs, and those are ones that you might argue, well, these are not very composable because they have all these different capabilities built in. But we have definitely seen them win some competitive selections in the market after careful consideration because the architecture worked for the client, as opposed to some of the lighter weight ones on the right. So the question is, the point here is that when Real Story Group makes a quadrant like this, we're not declaring winners and losers. We're just saying there's different ways of visualizing the market. You'll notice that we also break out on the y-axis here between suites and independents. That's because we want to encourage you to be very, very cautious about the suites. There's a lot of vendor bullshit going on there, and a lot of deep unhappiness among those licensees. So you definitely want to talk to us before you go license Salesforce, SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, Adobe as your CDP vendor. So in terms of what you should do is just to wrap up here, define what does composability mean for your enterprise? You definitely want a composable stack, but how much do you want to decompose the individual services in that stack? That's going to vary a lot, and this is an area, obviously, where we can advise you. You definitely want to assess vendor claims because particularly now, every CDP vendor says they're composable. They are composable to varying degrees. This is a spectrum. And so the question really is, what's the right fit for you? And then analyze the costs. As Apoorv said, there's a lot of different cost-benefit ratios that are going on here. Even with if you're using a reverse ETL vendor, there's a lot of data getting pushed around. And so you need to consider not just the cost, but also the usability issues there. So you definitely want to define your requirements and focus around business alignment. And that's really important because with respect to highly composable solutions, and this is not just in the CDP space, but in general, the more composable the solutions, sometimes the less business friendly they are. And you don't want to fall into that trap where someone's made you a technical sale and you find that you're having to justify to your business people why this could actually work for them. Usability is a key consideration even for marketing ops people who might be technically savvy. The CDP has to work for them. Okay, so how can Real Story Group help you? There's 3 different ways that we can help you in your CDP, or for that matter, MarTech journey. One is you can license our CDP research, and you get access not just to all the vendor goodies in terms of what's good about them, what's bad about them, but also you can use our Real Quadrant Selector tool to narrow down a quadrant that works for you. You have access to us on the phone to help guide you through the process. Some of our larger subscribers do a full stack selection, so that's the second way of working with us, a full stack subscription, where they license basically all of our research and we advise them on their broader stack. A subset of those have joined our Real Story Group Council, which is a private members-only council that meets several times a year, a couple times in person, 3 other times virtually, where they share lessons, talk about their experience with different vendors. It's a wonderful private community. If you're interested in that, you can contact us as well. Also wanted to point out, just released today, we're going to be hosting a virtual CDP symposium on June 12th. Here's where you can register. I'm going to put the link in the chat as well. And I encourage you to check it out. It's going to be 4.5 hours of content, almost all from enterprise end users like you. So these are going to be major enterprise leaders talking about their experiences with CDPs. A lot of jam-packed information. It's free to you as a MarTech leader if you are a consultant or advisors. If you're a consultant or an advisor or an investor, you do have to pay a nominal fee to participate. That's all explained on the website. So once again, I want to remind you, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to use the questions tab in the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll be able to answer those here. We'll have a few minutes here quickly. So let me just get to the final screen here where we can talk about, let's see, we can talk about next steps, right? So sorry we ended up ending the show there, but we'll still chat here in terms of the questions that you have. Let me just go over to the questions tab on the GoToWebinar control panel. Does your warning regarding enterprise CDP, e.g. Salesforce, I think that's Data Cloud, also include the new Sitecore CDP? Yeah, so Sitecore CDP is very lightweight. It's something that they acquired. They don't really sell it as a CDP. You know, it's we kind of sort of covered. I don't know, Pooh, if you want to add any more about the Sitecore CDP. It's really kind of just an add-on to their WCM.
That's right. They really acquired a lightweight CDP, and it is actually required by them to integrate all the other products that they acquired. So it's not really, often we see it as a standalone CDP. That's right.
Yeah, we typically don't see it licensed as a standalone CDP. James M is asking, do you think all CDP vendors will eventually create composable push-down querying as a feature? Yeah, so what James is referring here to is what a lot of composable CDP vendors talk about, which is that they have the queries happening in the data warehouse. I think they may be forced to, just for marketing purposes. It's not always clear that that's a great use case. You know, as CDPs become more and more real-time, that's also going to force the data being pushed away from a data warehouse that typically can't do real-time. And so, yeah, pushing the querying down sounds great. Build your evergreen segments there, great. But, you know, as we become more and more real-time with our data, it's going to matter less and less, I think, in the future. Dharmesh is asking, where does Adobe AEP plus RTCDP lie in your composable list? So we don't really have a composable list. Again, all CDPs are on various degrees of composability. I would say in general, Adobe talks a good game around composability, but because Adobe is fundamentally dishonest in the way that they market this sort of stuff, you can't take them, you have to take them with more than a grain of salt, and it's actually an extremely clunky, very Adobe dependent platform. Stephen is asking, will the recording of this webinar be shared? The deck will be shared, Stephen. If your firm is a Real Story Group subscriber, you will get access to the recording. So just in terms of next steps, here's a way that you can contact us either on LinkedIn, you can email Explore, and this nice person, Scott Daly, has been working with us for 10 years. We'll get back in touch with you. He's not a high-pressure sales guy. He just wants to help you understand what your needs are and how we can help you. You can always download a sample of our CDP research at that URL below. And once again, invite you to check out the symposium, the link to which I put in the chat window. We're just releasing it today. Super excited about that. And otherwise, thanks again for chiming in with us today. Always love to talk about this topic. You can become a subscriber and we can talk to you about it in much more detail. But for now, this is Tony Byrne for Real Story Group on behalf of my colleagues Apurva and Alina, signing out for now. Thanks. Bye now.